The first signs of change appeared quietly, almost imperceptibly, within the hallowed halls of the Vatican. At first it was a matter of vestments. The familiar simplicity of papal attire, so characteristic of Francis's years, gave way to the rich fabrics and intricate embroidery of earlier centuries. When Pope Leo XIV emerged on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, in the crimson mozzetta and gold-trimmed stole, the crowd's reaction was instantaneous, a mixture of awe, nostalgia, and shock. For many, it was as if the past had come alive, the visual language of tradition reasserting itself in a single powerful gesture. Observers quickly realized this was not a mere aesthetic choice, but a signal of deeper transformation. Within days, the Vatican announced the restoration of several rituals that had been set aside or simplified during the previous pontificate. The most striking among them was the public bestowal of the pallium, a woolen band symbolizing authority, on new archbishops, a ceremony Pope Francis had moved to local dioceses in 2015. Now under Leo XIV, the ancient rite returned to Rome, with archbishops kneeling before the Pope in a spectacle broadcast to millions. The symbolism was unmistakable. The center of gravity had shifted back to the Eternal City. The changes did not stop there. The ritual of the baciamano, the traditional kissing of the papal ring, was reinstated after years of informal handshakes and brief nods. Latin, once reserved for the most solemn occasions, began to reappear in major liturgies and papal addresses. The Gregorian chant, with its haunting echoes of centuries past, filled the basilicas once more. Vatican insiders confirmed that Leo XIV had ordered the reopening of the apostolic sacristy, instructing artisans to restore vestments and liturgical objects that had not seen the light of day since the early 21st century. Reactions within the church were swift and polarized. Traditionalists rejoiced, interpreting the return to form as a long-awaited correction and a reaffirmation of Catholic identity. For them, Leo XIV's actions represented continuity with the Church's deepest roots, a visible sign that the faith of their ancestors still had a place in the modern world. Social media buzzed with images of the Pope in full regalia, accompanied by hashtags celebrating the restoration and return of Rome. Yet not everyone was pleased. Some clergy and lay people who had embraced the reforms of Francis voiced concern that the renewed emphasis on tradition might alienate those who had found meaning in simplicity and accessibility. Editorials in Catholic publications debated the implications for the Church's mission in a rapidly changing world. Would these changes draw people closer to the faith or risk reinforcing perceptions of elitism and distance? The debate was fierce, and the Vatican's communications office found itself fielding questions from journalists and believers alike. Pope Leo XIV, for his part, remained steadfast. In his first major interview after the changes, he spoke of the need to reconnect with the wellspring of our tradition, not as a museum piece, but as a living inheritance. He emphasized that the Church's rituals and symbols were not obstacles to evangelization, but bridges, ways of expressing timeless truths in a language that transcended generations. He acknowledged the challenges of balancing tradition and renewal, but insisted that the Church could not afford to lose sight of its origins. The impact of these reforms was felt far beyond the Vatican walls. Dioceses around the world received instructions to reintegrate certain liturgical practices that had fallen out of use. Seminaries revised their curricula to include greater emphasis on Latin Gregorian chant and the history of papal ceremonies. Bishops who had quietly maintained older customs found themselves newly emboldened, while those who favored a more contemporary approach faced difficult conversations with their clergy and congregations. Pilgrims flocked to Rome in record numbers, eager to witness the revived ceremonies firsthand. Tour operators reported a surge in bookings for papal audiences and liturgical events. For many visitors, the experience was transformative, a rare opportunity to participate in rites that had shaped the spiritual life of the church for centuries. The city itself seemed to respond with artisans and craftsmen receiving new commissions to restore and create sacred objects in the traditional style. As the months passed, the full scope of Leo XIV's vision became clearer. The restoration of ancient traditions was not a retreat from the world, but an attempt to anchor the church more firmly in its own story. The Pope's speeches returned again and again to the theme of continuity, the idea that in a time of rapid change and uncertainty, the Church's greatest strength lay in its ability to remember. For some, this message was a source of reassurance. For others, it raised questions about the future direction of Catholicism. The restoration of tradition under Pope Leo XIV quickly became one of the most discussed topics in Catholic circles and beyond. Theologians and historians were invited onto radio and television programs to explain the significance of the revived rituals. Many pointed out that the Church had always navigated a delicate balance between continuity and reform, and that every era faced its own challenge in discerning which traditions to preserve and which to adapt. Leo XIV's decisions, they argued, were not simply about aesthetics, but about the Church's self-understanding and its relationship to a world in flux. In seminaries, young men training for the priesthood found themselves immersed in practices that had seemed almost antiquated just a few years earlier. Latin lessons became more rigorous, and choirs spent hours rehearsing Gregorian chant. Professors encouraged students to reflect on the meaning behind the revived rituals, emphasizing that these were not empty gestures, but expressions of a living faith. Some seminarians embraced the changes enthusiastically, while others struggled to reconcile them with the pastoral priorities they had learned under Francis's influence. The laity too experienced the shift in a variety of ways. In some parishes, the return of traditional vestments and music was met with enthusiasm. Older parishioners recalled their youth when such ceremonies were the norm and shared stories with younger generations about the beauty and mystery of the old rites. In other communities, especially those that had flourished under more contemporary forms of worship, the changes prompted confusion and even resistance. Parish councils debated how best to implement the Vatican's new directives, seeking to balance respect for tradition with sensitivity to local needs. Media coverage of the changes was intense and often polarized. Some outlets praised Leo XIV for his courage in restoring the Church's heritage, portraying him as a defender of timeless values in a world adrift. Others criticized what they saw as a retreat from the spirit of openness and simplicity that had characterized Francis's pontificate. Editorials warned that the renewed emphasis on hierarchy and ritual could alienate those who had found a home in the Church precisely because of its recent reforms. Amid the debate, Pope Leo XIV continued to articulate his vision. In homilies and official documents, he insisted that the restoration of tradition was not an attempt to erase the achievements of his predecessor, but to deepen the Church's roots so that it might better bear fruit in the present. He spoke of the hermeneutic of continuity, a phrase borrowed from Benedict XVI, suggesting that true renewal was always grounded in fidelity to the past. The Pope's ability to frame his reforms in terms of both memory and mission resonated with many, even as it left others unconvinced. Internationally, the impact was felt in different ways. In parts of Africa and Asia, where Catholic communities had long maintained a strong attachment to traditional forms, the reforms were welcomed as an affirmation of their identity. Bishops in these regions reported a renewed sense of connection to Rome and to the universal Church. In Western Europe and North America, where debates over liturgy and authority had often been more contentious, the changes sparked new conversations about the future of Catholicism in secular societies. Ecumenical relations were also affected. Some leaders of other Christian denominations expressed concern that the return to older forms might signal a closing of doors to dialogue and cooperation. Others saw in Leo XIV's actions a reminder of the richness of Christian tradition and the importance of preserving sacred heritage. The Pope responded by reaffirming his commitment to ecumenism, arguing that true unity could only be built on honesty about differences as well as shared beliefs. Within the Vatican, the pace of change was relentless. Commissions were established to oversee the restoration of art, music, and architecture in accordance with historical precedent. Liturgical books were reprinted and distributed, and workshops were held to train clergy in the revived ceremonies. The Curia, long accustomed to incremental reform, now found itself adapting to a new rhythm, one that demanded both reverence for the past and agility in the present. As the first year of Leo XIV's pontificate drew to a close, it was clear that his restoration of tradition had set the tone for a new era. The Church was once again at the center of global attention, its ancient rites and symbols captivating the imagination of believers and outsiders alike. Debates about the meaning and value of these changes continued, but one thing was certain: the dramatic comeback of Vatican tradition under Pope Leo XIV had left an indelible mark on the life of the Church. As the reforms of Pope Leo XIV became firmly established, their effects began to ripple through every layer of Catholic life. Bishops' conferences around the world convened to discuss the practicalities of implementing the new directives. In some regions, the transition was smooth, with clergy and laity alike embracing the renewed sense of connection to the Church's ancient heritage. In others, the process was more complicated, marked by debate and, at times, tension between those eager for restoration and those who felt a sense of loss for the simplicity and openness of the previous era. Liturgical celebrations took on a new grandeur. The return of elaborate processions, incense, and the full ceremonial use of the papal tiara during major feasts captivated the faithful and drew curious onlookers. Cathedrals and basilicas, once accustomed to more restrained liturgies, now resounded with the solemnity of Latin prayers and the majestic swell of organ and choir. The visual transformation was striking, and for many it evoked a sense of continuity with the Church's most storied centuries. In the Vatican, the restoration extended beyond liturgy. The papal apartments, which had been kept modest and functional under Francis, were refurnished with historic tapestries, gilded furnishings, and relics from previous pontificates. The Apostolic Palace once again became a place of pilgrimage for those wishing to witness the renewed splendor of the papal court. Artisans, historians, and conservators found themselves in high demand as the Vatican invested in the preservation and revival of its artistic and architectural legacy. The Pope's weekly audiences, now featuring traditional papal blessings and the use of the sedia gestatoria, a ceremonial throne carried by attendants, became a sensation on social media. Images and videos of these events circulated widely, sparking renewed interest in Catholic customs, even among those outside the faith. For many young Catholics, the pageantry was a revelation, offering a tangible link to a past they had only read about in history books. Yet the return to tradition was not without controversy. In some dioceses, priests and parishioners expressed discomfort with the abruptness of the changes. Pastoral councils debated how to balance the new mandates with the pastoral needs of diverse communities. Some worried that the emphasis on ritual might overshadow the Church's commitment to social justice, inclusion, and outreach to the marginalized. Letters and petitions reached Rome from groups concerned that the reforms might create new barriers for those seeking a place within the Church. Pope Leo XIV responded to these concerns in a series of addresses, emphasizing that tradition and mission were not mutually exclusive. He argued that the beauty and solemnity of the Church's rites could inspire deeper faith and greater service to others. The Pope called on all Catholics to see the restored customs not as an end in themselves, but as a means of drawing closer to the mystery of Christ and the call to holiness. He encouraged clergy to accompany their communities with patience and understanding, recognizing that change, however rooted in history, could be challenging. The impact of the reforms was also felt in Catholic education. Universities and schools integrated the study of traditional liturgy, art, and music into their curricula. Students participated in workshops on Gregorian chant, iconography, and the Latin language. For many, these experiences offered a new appreciation for the depth and richness of Catholic culture. Educators noted a renewed sense of pride and identity among students who saw themselves as inheritors of a living tradition. Internationally, the Pope's restoration of tradition influenced ecumenical and interfaith relations. Some leaders of other Christian communities welcomed the renewed emphasis on heritage, seeing it as a sign of the Catholic Church's commitment to its roots. Others expressed concern that the shift might hinder ongoing dialogues aimed at unity and mutual understanding. The Pope sought to reassure his counterparts, meeting with representatives of various faiths and reaffirming his dedication to respectful engagement and cooperation. As the second year of Leo XIV's pontificate unfolded, the Church found itself at a crossroads. The restoration of ancient customs had rekindled a sense of wonder and reverence for many, but it had also surfaced questions about identity, relevance, and the path forward. The Pope's vision was clear: to anchor the Church in its tradition while remaining open to the needs of the present. Whether this vision would unite or further divide the global Catholic community remained an open question, but there was no doubt that a dramatic new chapter had begun. As Pope Leo XIV's restoration of tradition matured, its influence extended into the daily rhythms of Catholic life across continents. Parish priests in small towns and sprawling cities alike began to reintroduce elements of the liturgy that had been dormant for decades. The use of incense, processional crosses, and the chanting of the Credo in Latin became more common even in communities that had previously favored simpler, vernacular celebrations. In some places, these changes were met with reverence and curiosity. In others, with hesitation and questions about their relevance to contemporary worshippers. The Pope's annual Christmas and Easter liturgies became global spectacles, broadcast live and watched by millions. The return of the full papal regalia, the elaborate blessing, Urbi et Orbi, delivered from the central balcony of St. Peter's, and the presence of Swiss guards in their most ornate uniforms, all contributed to a renewed sense of occasion. Pilgrims traveled from afar to witness these ceremonies, filling Rome's squares and streets with a sense of anticipation reminiscent of earlier eras. Inside the Vatican, the restoration of tradition also meant a revival of courtly etiquette and protocol. Papal audiences were now conducted with greater formality, and visiting dignitaries were greeted with rituals that emphasized the continuity and dignity of the Holy See. The College of Cardinals, too, experienced a revival of ancient customs, with meetings and consistories conducted according to time-honored procedures. The sense of history was palpable, and many found inspiration in the visible connection to centuries of Catholic governance. The Pope's reforms influenced the arts as well. Composers and musicians were commissioned to create new works in the style of the Renaissance and Baroque masters. Sacred art exhibitions featuring restored icons and newly commissioned works drew crowds to the Vatican museums. Writers and poets reflected on the meaning of tradition in a rapidly changing world, and Catholic publishers reported increased interest in classic theological texts and spiritual writings. While many celebrated the return to tradition, the transition was not without its critics. Some theologians and pastoral leaders voiced concerns that the renewed emphasis on ritual and hierarchy could overshadow the Church's mission to serve the poor and marginalized. They cautioned that the beauty of the liturgy must never become an end in itself, but should always point toward deeper conversion and action. Debates over the direction of the Church played out in synods, conferences, and parish meetings, reflecting the diversity of opinion among the faithful. Pope Leo XIV addressed these concerns directly in a series of encyclicals and public statements. He reaffirmed the Church's commitment to social justice care for the vulnerable and engagement with the modern world. He argued that tradition and mission were not opposed but complementary, that the riches of the Church's heritage could inspire new forms of service and witness. The Pope called on Catholics to embrace both the beauty of the liturgy and the demands of charity, insisting that one could not flourish without the other. The effects of the Restoration were also felt in the realm of vocations. Seminaries reported an increase in applications, particularly from young men drawn to the solemnity and grandeur of the revived rites. Many cited the sense of purpose and identity they found in the Church's traditions as a motivating factor. Bishops noted that while not all candidates would become priests, the renewed interest in religious life was a sign of hope for the future. Internationally, the Pope's reforms continued to shape the Church's relationships with other faiths and cultures. In regions where Catholicism was a minority, the visible return to tradition sometimes sparked curiosity and dialogue with local religious leaders. In predominantly Catholic countries, the changes were often embraced as a source of pride and unity. The Pope's travels abroad, marked by elaborate liturgies and public processions, drew large crowds and widespread media attention. As the Church entered the third year of Leo XIV's pontificate, it was clear that the restoration of tradition had become more than a set of policies. It was a movement that touched every aspect of Catholic life. The Pope's vision of a Church, rooted in its past, yet open to the present, continued to guide his leadership, even as debates and challenges persisted. The dramatic comeback of ancient Vatican customs had not only changed the face of the Church, but had also sparked a global conversation about the meaning of faith identity and continuity in a world of constant change. The momentum generated by Pope Leo XIV's restoration of ancient Vatican traditions continued to shape the Church's trajectory in profound ways. As the faithful around the world adjusted to the renewed emphasis on ritual and heritage, the Pope's leadership style became a beacon for those seeking stability amid rapid societal changes. His speeches, often rich with references to the Church's history and the importance of continuity, resonated deeply with many Catholics who felt a longing for a connection to the past. In many dioceses, the reintroduction of traditional liturgical elements sparked a renaissance of interest in the Church's cultural and spiritual treasures. Choirs expanded their repertoires to include Gregorian chant and polyphonic music, while art restoration projects received increased funding and attention. The sensory experience of the liturgy, the sight of ornate vestments, the sound of ancient hymns, the scent of incense became a powerful tool for evangelization, drawing both longtime believers and newcomers into a deeper encounter with the sacred. The Pope's emphasis on tradition also influenced the Church's approach to education and formation. Seminaries and Catholic universities incorporated more comprehensive studies of church history, liturgy, and theology, encouraging students to appreciate the richness of their heritage. This educational shift aimed to prepare clergy and laity alike to engage confidently with the challenges of modernity, grounded in a firm understanding of their faith's roots. However, the Restoration was not without its challenges. Some communities struggled to reconcile the renewed focus on formality and ritual with the pastoral needs of diverse and often marginalized populations. Critics argued that the emphasis on tradition risked overshadowing the Church's mission of social justice and outreach. In response, Pope Leo XIV and his advisors emphasized that tradition and mission were complementary, not contradictory. They called for a holistic approach that integrated reverence for the past with active engagement in the world's pressing issues. The Pope's diplomatic efforts also reflected this balance. While he championed the Church's heritage, he remained committed to dialogue and cooperation with other faiths and secular institutions. His travels and meetings often highlighted the Church's role as a moral voice in global affairs, advocating for peace, human dignity, and the protection of the vulnerable. As the Church navigated these complex dynamics, the faithful found themselves part of a living tradition that was both ancient and dynamic. The restoration of Vatican customs under Pope Leo XIV was more than a return to old ways. It was a reawakening of a spiritual identity that sought to inspire and guide in a rapidly changing world. The Pope's vision challenged Catholics to embrace their history with pride and to carry forward the mission of the Church with renewed vigor and faith. The global Catholic community watched closely as the Church continued to evolve under this renewed emphasis on tradition. Debates and discussions flourished, reflecting the diversity of perspectives within the faith. Yet amidst the conversations, a common thread emerged, a recognition that the Church's strength lay in its ability to hold fast to its roots while reaching out to the future. In this pivotal moment, Pope Leo XIV's leadership marked a significant chapter in the ongoing story of Catholicism. His restoration of ancient Vatican traditions was not merely a nostalgic gesture, but a deliberate act of faith aimed at grounding the Church in its timeless truths as it faced the challenges and opportunities of the modern era. In conclusion, Pope Leo XIV's bold restoration of ancient Vatican traditions has marked a transformative era for the Catholic Church. By reintroducing time-honored rituals, vestments, and liturgical practices, he has rekindled a profound connection to the Church's rich heritage, offering the faithful a renewed sense of identity and purpose. This revival has not only deepened spiritual engagement, but also sparked important conversations about the balance between tradition and modernity. While challenges remain in harmonizing these restored customs with the Church's mission of outreach and social justice, Pope Leo XIV's leadership exemplifies a commitment to continuity and renewal. His vision encourages Catholics worldwide to embrace their history as a living foundation for faith-inspiring hope and unity in a rapidly changing world. As the Church moves forward, the legacy of this restoration will continue to shape its path, reminding all that the strength of Catholicism lies in its ability to honor the past, while courageously facing the future. Pope Leo XIV's tenure thus stands as a testament to the enduring power of tradition to inspire, guide, and transform.